My name is Brent. I've been working in the film industry for about a decade building software for artists. You will use layouts in just about every PyQT application that you write. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over all the most common layouts that you will find in PyQT. Code and an article covering all of this will be linked down in the description. Now let's get to the code. So what are layouts? Layouts are what is used to allow our applications to stretch and expand and have the different widgets that are inside of them move how we would expect them to be, or how we would want them to be. Before we get to coding with the actual layouts, we're going to go over some base code, which I'm going to be using in all of the examples. So let's take a look. Up at the top, we have some imports. We import sys, and then we import a bunch of things in PyQt5.qt widgets. Up here, we have a class called QGridLabel that I override QLabel. This is essentially to allow us to have a QLabel or a giant rectangle as a widget that we can add that will have a specific color so we can really see what the different layouts are actually doing. So here I override QLabel, and then in the init, I allow you to pass in a color. This is going to be a string for the background color of the rectangle that you want. I run super init, so it initializes the QLabel. And then I use self.setStyleSheet and set the background color to be the color that we pass in. Down here, we have a main window class that we override the main window. In the init function, we run super, we set the window title, we set a main layout. In this case, I'm setting QVBoxLayout. We'll be getting to that layout as our first layout we look at in a moment. I create a widget. I set the layout for that widget to be the main layout, and then I set the central widget. And then down here in the main function, we create an application. We create the main window. We show the main window, and then we execute it. And then we run the main. So this is the code that we're going to use in all of the layouts that we're going to look at. So let's dive into looking at the VBox layout. We're going to create a new file. So I'm going to right click here and then do new Python file. And then we're going to do VBox_layout. Okay, and then we're going to go grab all of our base code and paste it here. So we have all of the same code. And just to show what this base code does, why don't we just run it? So I'm going to do VBox or Python VBoxLayout. And as you can see here, we just get an empty window. So let's take a look at what VBoxLayout actually does. So we're going to add a couple of widgets to this. So we're going to do main layout dot add widget, and we're going to create a label, a yellow label, or we're going to create a red label actually. So we're going to do colored label, and we're just going to pass it red. And then we're going to do the same thing for yellow and blue. And so all we did is we did main layout.add widget. So we are adding a widget. In this case, it's a colored label, which is just our overridden version of QLabel that will set the color as the color of the background. And we're doing it within a QVBoxLayout. And as I mentioned before, down here, we create a widget and we set the main layout for that widget and then set that as the central widget for the window. Maybe you can guess what a VBox layout does. So why don't we run it and see what it actually looks like. Let's close this out and then let's run Python VBox layout. So as you can see here, we have vertically aligned labels. So we added a red label, then a yellow label, and then a blue label. So as you can see here, the VBox layout lays out the widgets vertically. And so if we expand this, you can see that it expands the label both vertically and horizontally. So the VBoxLayout, what it will do is in the order that you add the widgets from top to bottom, it will vertically align those widgets. So that's a VBoxLayout. The next most common layout you will run into is an HBoxLayout. So why don't we show an example of what that is? Let's close this out. I am going to create a new Python file, and it's going to be called HBoxLayout.py. And we're going to copy the entire VBoxLayout example and just paste it here. And all we're going to do is we're going to replace QVBoxLayout with QHBoxLayout. So if we go down here, we need to replace it here. And as you can guess, an HBox layout will create a horizontal layout. And so what you can expect will happen is that you will have 3 labels in the window with a red label on the left, a middle label as yellow, and then a blue label on the right. So if we go ahead and run this, you can see here that that is what we get. We get a red on the left, a yellow in the middle, and a blue on the right. And then as you expand and contract the label, it expands and contracts. So those are the VBox and HBox layouts. They're pretty simple. But something interesting that you can do is you can combine layouts. So you can put a VBox in an HBox layout, or you can put an HBox in a VBox layout. So let's take a look at how to do that. So let's close this out. So I'm going to create a new file. So we're going to right click up here and say new file. And then we're going to do V and HBox layout.py. And we're going to copy, I'm going to copy the VBox layout example, and we're going to do paste. So we have the exact same as when we had the VBox layout. Well, let's talk about what the example is going to be. So we are going to be creating a 2-row layout. So we're going to have a top row that is going to have red, yellow, and blue labels, and then a bottom row that is going to have orange, green, and purple labels. And so we're going to combine using these 2 layouts by having a horizontal layout for the red, yellow, and blue labels, and then a second horizontal layout for the orange, green, and purple labels. And then we're going to use a vertical layout that's going to contain both of the horizontal layouts. So let's look at what that looks like. So we have the main layout, which is going to be that vertical layout, which is going to contain both the horizontal layout. And so first we need to make sure that we add the HBox layout import up here. And once we do that, we can go down here and add the first row, which is going to be row 1 layout is equal to QHBoxLayout. And then for row 2, we're going to do the same thing. So we're just going to change the name. And so we have our vertical layout, which is going to contain our 2 rows of HBox layouts. So we are going to update the code so that the red, yellow, and blue labels are coming from the row 1 layout, or are in the row 1 layout. And then we're going to copy all of this to create our 3 new labels, which are going to be orange, green, and then purple. And then we're going to update this to say row 2. And then the last thing that we have to do is we have to add the 2 row layouts to the main layout, which is the vertical layout. So main layout dot add layout, and then we're going to do row 1 layout, and then we're going to copy and paste this to do the same for row 2. Okay, so that's all the code we need, but let's quickly go over it all again. So we started off by adding the QHBoxLayout, so we have both QVBox and QHBox. The main layout is going to be a vertical layout because it's going to contain the two horizontal layouts that we create here, the row 1 and row 2. The row 1 layout has the red, yellow, and blue labels. So we're going to see from left to right on the top row, red, yellow, blue, and then for the row 2, we are going to have its own row and its own horizontal layout, and it's going to be having orange, green, and purple labels. And then you need to add to the vertical layout, which is the main layout, the two row layouts or the horizontal layouts that we created for row 1 and row 2. And that's the code. And so if we go ahead and run this by running Python v and HBoxLayout, you will see here that we get what we expected. We have two rows. We have red, yellow, and blue on row 1, and orange, green, and purple on the bottom. And then we can stretch and expand this as we see fit. But what happens if we don't have the same number of widgets for each of the rows? So as an example, I'm going to remove the yellow widget, the yellow label, and we'll see what happens. So if we go back to the code and we just comment out adding the yellow label, and we close this and run it again, you can see here that the layout makes it so that it stretches to take up the entire space. So that HBox layout is going to stretch horizontally to make sure that the red and the blue take up all of the space of that row. But what if you wanted it more like a grid? So you wanted to have red, empty space, blue, and then your orange, green, and purple. And so that's what we're going to look at next, is we're going to look at how to do a QGridLayout. So if we close this out, we are going to go back to the code and we're going to create a new Python file that we're going to call gridlayout.py. And we're going to copy over our v and hbox layout code. And then up at the top, we're going to delete QHBox and VBox layouts imports, and we're just going to do QGridLayout. So for this grid layout, we're going to try and recreate what we started with for the V and HBox layouts. So we're going to have the red, yellow, and blue labels on the top, and then we're going to have the orange, green, and purple on the bottom. So just a 2-row, 3-column layout. And so after we have imported the QGridLayout, we are going to go down here and remove these extra layouts that we don't need anymore, and then put QGridLayout here. And then we're going to copy and paste and just make it so that all of them are adding the widget to the main layout. And we can remove these two adding of layouts to the main layout because we do not need them anymore. So we've added all of these labels to the main layout, but how do we actually specify what row and column that we want them to be? So the nice thing with QGridLayout is it allows you to pass into the add widget function the row and column that you want it to be in. So for this, you pass it the row and then the column, where the number is going to specify which it is, where 0 for the row is going to be the top and the max number is going to be the bottom, whereas the column, the 0 is going to be the left. So for the red widget, it is going to be, we want it to be in the 0, 0 position. So row 0, column 0, which is going to be the far left top widget. And then for yellow, we want it to be 0, 1, because we want it to be in row 0, which is the top row, and then column 1. And so we can follow this pattern for blue, so it's going to be 0, 2. And then going to the second row, it's going to be 1, 0 for orange, 1, 1 for green, and 1, 2 for purple. So once again, we have the red label, which is going to be at position 0, 0, which is the top left. Yellow label is going to be row 0, column 1, which is going to be the middle top. The blue label is going to be row 0, so the top, and then number 2 column, which is a far right. And then for orange, it's going to be the second row, which is 1, and the column 0, so it's going to be the bottom left. Green is going to be at the center bottom, 1, 1, and purple is going to be at the bottom right. So if we run this code, we do Python grid layout, this is what we get. It's the exact same thing as what we saw when we mixed the QVBox and HBox layouts, and it will act exactly the same, at least when we have the same number of rows and columns of widgets. But as we said, let's say we wanted to get rid of this yellow widget and we wanted this just now to be empty. It's just as simple as removing that adding of the yellow widget. So if we go down here and we comment out the line of adding the yellow and we rerun it, you can see here that we don't have a yellow widget anymore, and it still expands and contracts as we would want it, and it stays in this grid. And something that is really useful for QGridLayout is you can have widgets span more than one row or more than one column. So the next example that we're going to look at is how to make that happen. What we're going to do is we're going to create it so that this red label is going to span over here in column 0 and 1. And then we're going to expand this blue widget to go from row 0 to row 1. And then we're going to leave this orange and green widget where they are. And if we go and create a new file, grid layout_span.py, and we copy what we had for the grid layout example. So the cool thing with grid layout is with the add widget function, you can tell it what row and what column you want it to be in, but you can also pass it how many rows and how many columns it's going to span. And so with the red, we're going to have it span 2 columns. And so we have it passed that we're going to give the red widget, it's going to start in row 0, column 0, and it's going to take up 1 row and 2 columns. And we're not going to have the yellow anymore, so we can delete that. So if we wanted to next make it so that blue expanded so that it took up both the top and bottom row, we would do, it would take up 2 rows and 1 column. And since the blue is going to be taking up the bottom right row, we need to delete purple. And so if we go ahead and run it, what we should see is we should see the red take up the first two in row 1, and then we should see blue take up the rightmost column. So if we do Python grid layout span.py, yes, you can see here that we have red taking up the top 2 columns and then blue taking the full right column. And as previously, you can completely get rid of entire widgets in the grid and it will stay the same. So we're going to comment out green and you'll see that it still expands and contracts as we would expect. Okay, we're in the final stretch. We're going to go over the last most common layout that you're going to run into, which is a QFormLayout. So when you create forms, so things that you have to fill out in an application, this is the one that you are generally going to be wanting to use. So if we go back to our code and we create a new file, form layout.py, and this time we're just going to copy the base layout instead of any of the other ones. Form layout, paste, and we are going to import QFormLayout, and we're going to set the main layout as form layout. So what we're going to do in this example is we're going to have a couple of text boxes that you have to fill in with some labels to the left explaining what those text boxes are for. And when I say text boxes, I really mean line edits. If you haven't worked with labels or line edits yet, I've got tutorials for both of those, and those will be linked above as well as down in the description. But for now, we need to add more imports. We need to import Q line edit as well. Unlike the rest of the widgets that we've been using, the way that we add to a form layout is going to be the add row function. So it's going to be main layout dot add row, and we're going to pass it a label that we want for the form row, and then the line edit or other widget that you want for the row. So in this case, it's going to be, we're going to create a Q label directly in here. And we're going to, in this example, we're just going to have a first name, last name, and a favorite color that we're wanting to get in our form layout. So we're going to have a Q label, and we're going to pass it first name as the text for it. And then we're going to pass it a Q line edit. And then we're going to copy this, and we're going to create 2 more rows. We're going to change the second one to last name and the last one to favorite color. And so with this, we should just get a window with the label of first name and then a line edit, a last name, and then a line edit, and favorite color, and then a line edit. So if we go ahead and run this, Python form layout.py, that's what we get. So one of the useful things about this is that dependent on the graphics system that your OS is using, it will lay out the form differently, because Mac versus Linux might have different windowing systems, and so it might lay out the form a little bit different in that the labels might be left justified, so they might be on the left side of the screen instead of center or right justifying to the text box, the Q line edit. Yes, you could get away with using a grid layout to do this if you wanted to, but using the form layout is useful in that it follows what your windowing system on your computer wants the layout to be. And those are the most common layouts that you're going to be using in your PyQT journey. We've got QVBoxLayout, QHBoxLayout, we've got QGridLayout, and then we have QFormLayout. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for what you would like me to cover next, please put them down in the comments. I'm always open to new ideas. If you got value out of this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. And like all software made for movies, we test in production. Thank you, and I'll see you around.